Have you ever had to pee so bad and you were rushing to the bathroom and you just didn't make it on time? Perhaps you leaked a few drops, or maybe even worse, you just had a complete accident where you had to end up changing clothes, etc. Well, if that has ever happened to you, you may be experiencing something that's called urge incontinence. And this is essentially when you get that strong, overwhelmingly strong sensation to pee, to go to the bathroom, and you simply cannot make it on time. Or maybe you have to rush, like everything get out of your way. You are sprinting to the bathroom because if not, you will end up leaking or peeing on yourself. Well, if that is the case for you, I want you to know that today I'm going to be explaining why this is happening, what we can do about it, and my top urge suppression techniques and bladder retraining tips so that you can stop leaking when you get the urge to pee. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So here is the pelvic floor. Once again, just a little bit of anatomy here. This is our lumbar spine. These bones right here through the side are our hip bones that we can put our hands on. This at the front is the pubic bone. And then all the red that you can see in through here are muscles. And those muscles are the pelvic floor muscles. And they essentially work like a trampoline. And so I always have to explain it that, the bone all the way around makes up like the metal kind of support of a trampoline. The ligaments, tendons, fascia, connective tissue that supports the pelvic floor muscles are what the springs in the trampoline would be. And then the mesh or the netting itself is going to be everything you see in red, which is the muscles themselves that make up that trampoline aspect, the netting, right, of the trampoline as a whole. So urge incontinence is classified as when the bladder, which lives inside of the pelvis, the bladder gets this overwhelmingly strong urge to go to the bathroom, and it ends up contracting. And what happens is that the bladder contracts. So it's got a muscle on the inside of it called the detrusor muscle that lines the inside of the bladder. That muscle starts to contract. These muscles start to let go and relax, and that ends up for a recipe for leakage, especially if obviously leakage is when you pee when you do not want to pee. So that is what leakage is, and that's the same thing as incontinence. So those words are interchangeable. So urge incontinence can be kind of impacting your life because of several things. And so we're gonna go over why urge incontinence happens and what kind of brings it on. So first things first, with urge incontinence, it typically ends up being because of just some bladder habits that have been put into place through your lifestyle just over years. And this can be just over time. Maybe when you were younger, your mom always told you, oh, make sure you go pee because I don't want to have to stop in the middle of my trip, in the middle of our errands for you to, whatever it may be. Or maybe you go to the bathroom just in case all the time because you don't want to have to stop and pee. But whatever it may be poor bladder, or maybe not the best bladder habits that you have kind of taken into your lifestyle over time. And over time, those have actually negatively impacted your bladder. Another big thing are bladder irritants. So I talked about this in one of my other videos, but bladder irritants, things that are supported by the literature, by research studies that are proven to irritate your bladder, are things such as alcohol, caffeine, and carbonated drinks. Those three things absolutely can be a trigger, or I should say, sorry, an irritant to your bladder, to the lining of the bladder itself, and that can really mess with your bladder and cause that overwhelming sense of urgency, and then you can't hold it, and now it's like a whole recipe for a disaster. Another big thing with urge incontinence is the triggers themselves. So I talked about this in another one of my videos, but I think a lot of us have been there when you take that key and you put it in the door and you turn that lock and you're like, whoa, you're overwhelmingly filled with this sense of urgency. Or maybe you do have urge incontinence and you're rushing to the bathroom and you're trying to pull down your pants, and just the act of pulling down your pants is a trigger, and boom, you end up leaking on yourself. Another big thing, which I have talked about in other videos as well, is just in case peeing. And so that is simply when you go to the bathroom just in case, and you start lowering that bladder's threshold and increasing the sensitivity of the bladder so that even when it fills up just a little bit, it's sending these signals to your brain that say, we need to pee, we need to pee. And sometimes that urge is still so strong that you don't make it in time. So with all that being said, how in the world do we treat urge incontinence? So first things first, the first thing I always look at is lifestyle and bladder habits. What that means is what type of fluids are you intaking? What type of foods are you intaking? We're gonna look at those things together and kind of compare notes and see if any of those things that you are consuming perhaps, land on that list of a potential irritant. And then what we can do is play around with taking that irritant out, or maybe adding in a little bit more water to kind of dilute that irritant, and maybe see if that helps with the urgency or the urge incontinence. So that would be things like maybe doing a water sandwich, which a water sandwich would be basically, let's say you have coffee in the morning and that caffeine definitely triggers your bladder or irritates your bladder. Maybe drinking a little bit more water right before that coffee and right after that coffee to kind of help dilute it inside of the bladder itself. Other things would be neutralizing those triggers. So sometimes for my clients, the sound of water is a trigger and that will cause them to pee or to leak on themselves. So that we need to do things to kind of reduce that anxiety, neutralize that trigger so that it's not so overwhelmingly strong. Obviously, I've talked about this multiple times in my videos, but just in case peeing, we want to stop or at least try to limit that so that we can train or retrain our bladder in a positive way. And then lastly, I really want to talk about water itself. So water, a lot of clients that I've worked with or people that I've even heard of or talked to, they end up limiting their water severely because they're terrified that they are going to leak. And the thing is that when you do that, you actually do yourself a disservice because the urine then becomes very concentrated in the bladder, and that alone can irritate your bladder, unfortunately. And so the solution to leakage is not limiting your water. It is simply, sometimes the actual solution is increasing your water, because pure water lubricates and kind of coats the bladder, and your bladder loves water. Pure, nothing like no flavor enhancers, no carbonation, nothing, just plain H2O. Those are some of the main things that I do to really help treat urge incontinence. All right, next thing we're going to talk about are my favorite tips to suppress that urge. So let's say that you've done all the things, right? You've taken out the bladder triggers, you've neutralized those triggers, you've taken out the irritants, you've added in that water, which, by the way, my recommendation for water is always at least half of your body weight in ounces for water. There is such a thing as drinking too much water, and that is typically when you are at either 100% or over 100% of your body's weight in ounces of water. Obviously, let's say you stopped your just in case peeing, etc., and you're still leaking a little bit. Well, then let's talk about your urge suppression strategies or techniques. So let's say you are sitting at work and you get that really strong urge to pee. First thing you're going to do, I would like you to do, is actually pause what you are doing, or stop what you are doing, and you're going to take some nice diaphragmatic breaths. When I say diaphragmatic breaths, I do not mean, watch my shoulders, I do not mean this, right? That's where all these muscles are coming up, my shoulders are rising, my chest is rising, all my neck muscles are turning on. No, I mean this, right? I'm going to take my hands and rest them on my tummy. This is what I mean. So it's down, I'm expanding into my whole trunk all the way around. You're gonna take a few of those breaths. So first, pause what you're doing, take a few deep diaphragmatic breaths. After that, you can try several of the following. You can do quick flicks, which are quick Kegel contractions. Kegels are simply squeezes of the pelvic floor muscles. Full let go and squeeze, let go, squeeze, let go. This can be anywhere from like 3 to 5 reps, 5 to 7 reps. It just kind of depends what this will do. There are reflex loops that go from your bladder, let me get it here, from your bladder to your spinal cord and back. There's a loop, there's multiple loops. This helps to break that loop. So what happens with leakage is that your bladder, the muscle inside of your bladder called the detrusor muscle, it starts to contract. Your pelvic floor muscle feels that, or your pelvic floor muscles then start to relax, and then boom, you end up peeing, because that's a natural process in the sense that it should do that automatically when you go to pee, but the problem with incontinence is that it's happening when you don't want it to happen. So back to square one, pause what you're doing, take some deep diaphragmatic breaths, and then do some quick Kegels, anywhere from like 3 to 7 or maybe even 10. Other things you can do, you can take your fingers, interlock them, and you can spread or kind of stretch them out like so. That often seems to help. If you are standing, you can lift your heels off the ground, do calf raises, 10 of those. You can also try counting backwards in your head, 100 down to 90, and then you're going to calmly walk to the bathroom. The act of rushing itself will often be a trigger to your bladder and make that bladder start to contract, your pelvic floor muscles start to relax, and then boom, you're gonna end up peeing on yourself. So those are my favorite top strategies to stop leaking with that urge to go to the bathroom. I hope that that was helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.